Welcome back, everybody. My name is Isaiah, and I am still just winging it. And today we're making a Port Dawg statue. What's a Port Dawg, you ask? Well, a Port Dawg is one of the members of the aerial transportation career field. And one of our main functions is sucking crap out of aircraft. Okay, that's not all we do, but I mean, the majority of the time we're actually pushing pallets onto planes and pushing more pallets onto planes and more pallets onto planes and acquiring future back problems. Anyway, let's get to it. I've never actually used armature wire that was this thick before. It's like a quarter of an inch thick. It's pretty massive, or 635 millimeters for you Europeans out there. Look at that. Perfect fit. Okay, so the reason I'm using such thick gauge armature wire is because this particular sculpture is going to be about 29 inches tall. And for the first half, I have to make it about 14 inches tall, and then the second half, I got to make another 14 inches tall because my tiny German oven won't really fit anything much bigger than that. So again, just start bulking out that armature wire with a whole mess load of tinfoil, and we'll just keep doing that because it's going to be pretty huge. And then pretty soon you got, well, legs, but, make them better looking. And then make sure they're about 14 inches tall. Yeah, that about does it. Okay, so now comes the super fun part of me trying to condition all of these little blocks of clay. I primarily use super sculpey medium, and it's somewhat malleable, but you really got to work it around to make sure it gets pretty soft so you can actually use it. And I have to do this with what I thought was going to be 4 pounds of clay, and then that turned into 7 pounds of clay, and things just got very tiring. Okay, so at this stage, I'm just kind of going around and making sure that that clay is somewhat sticking to the tin foil underneath, and I gotta smoosh all those little air pockets out because if I bake it and then there's an air pocket, it could result in the clay cracking, and I don't need a crack in my finished piece. So during that sculpture process, you're going to wind up smooshing all this clay around into itself to make pretty much like one solid piece or like a skin over the tin foil, if you will. Man, those are some fine legs. Okay, so now I gotta make his little feet. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just a big mound of tinfoil. If I used the clay by itself, it has a tendency to crack if it's solid clay like that. What I'm doing here is I have actually cut a piece of that armature wire into about, I think it's 17 inches. I'm giving myself 3 inches there so I can pound that into the actual existing torso of the clay so it will hold up the upper torso. Boom. Look at that. I'm a genius. Anyway, gonna build that up with some more tin foil, and then we're gonna cover that in more clay. I think by the time I finished this, I had used maybe 5 rolls of tinfoil, which are like 35 feet a piece. So yeah, it's a ton of tinfoil. And right here is your basic shape of the upper torso and the bulldog head. Yeah, that's it. Not very glamorous. So far, we're roughly around 28.5 inches, and this is the start of the bulldog head.
How about a magic trick?
So for the eyes, I used 2 giant ball bearings and just kind of stuck those in place, and then kind of drew on subtle details of what I'm going to start applying the clay to and making the shapes of. And like always, I'm really just winging it here. I don't have a lot of reference pics for this. I have maybe 1 or 2, and I'm just kind of doing what I can with what I got. Gotta add some clay to make his bulldog jowls here. Otherwise, it just wouldn't look right. Not really sure how much to add, so I'm just kind of adding enough till it looks right. Adding a little bit more onto the front of the mouth here. So when I add his 2 teeth protruding from his jaw later, it'll look appropriate. And now that the teeth are added, Good enough. And last but not least, we're going to put his ears on, and we'll call that done. Okay, so I had to make his legs slightly bigger, so I had to take off all of that clay and then add more tinfoil, and now I got to put all that clay back on, plus a little bit more. It happens. And now that we have the legs and the top torso completed, we're going to start adding more clay and the necessary details. Making a little Monster energy drink can because the military runs on energy drinks. Don't even get me started on whippets. Alright, that ate up some time. Now we're going to bust out our epoxy sculpt, mix that stuff together, and start putting together some other parts of this sculpture. This is me just test fitting the little spikies that are on his collar there, and now we're getting on to the other stuff. So this stuff right here is called a sluice. It's a mixture of rubbing alcohol and clay, and it's helping me to smooth out the epoxy sculpt because the epoxy sculpt is actually really sticky, and if I tried to smooth it out without it and just my fingertips, it would actually tear. So the rubbing alcohol on the clay is making it very slick, which makes it real easy to smooth out. And there you go. You learned something. So what I'll be making next is one of his accessories, which is the waist hose. So I was able to find this corrugated plastic for like $3.50 for 10 yards. It's an amazing deal. Unfortunately, I have about 9 yards left, so I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with that, but I'll find a use for it. I'm going to use a little bit of the UV resin here to cure this piece of clay onto the end of the plastic, and boom! There you go. Alright, so the sculpt itself is finished, it's baked, it's primed, now it's ready for the paint job. Going to use some black here, smoosh your paintbrush into it, and remember to treat it nice. I used the black paint first because I wanted to give the bronze paint afterwards a nice dark undertone. If I didn't, then the bronze paint itself would be a little too bright. And with all that being said, I think it's time for its close-up. Alright, so thanks again for stopping by and checking out one of my videos again. And remember, just keep winging it.